Good morning, everyone. We're going to take a second and let more people filter in. Righty. I guess I should go ahead and start. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining us today. The fourth of 5-hour-long sessions celebrate the books selected for the 2025 NEA Fellowship in Translation. First, we'd like to acknowledge the Center for the Art of Translation for supporting the Zoom series and putting the word out. Thank you, Michael, Leslie Ann, Chad, Casey, Allison, and all the other wonderful staff at CAT. And I'm indebted to YZ Chin, who's been an invaluable and utterly delightful ally in organizing these sessions. We're very lucky to have you as part of our cohort. Since 1981, the National Endowment for the Arts has awarded more than 600 fellowships to 538 literary translators across 82 languages and 93 countries. Our 2025 cohort was awarded grants to support translation into English of books written in 17 different languages from 21 countries. Thank you to Amy Stoles, Kate Day, and the other former NEA staffers who worked tirelessly to support artists and translators in every way they could. We're very grateful to you. Before I turn it over to today's moderator, Jenny Bat, I want to mention that we'll be back next week, same time, with 3 more incredible presentations from 2025 NEA Translation Fellows, and then a special conversation with members of the judging panel sharing insights from their selection process, which I, for one, cannot wait to hear all about. Over to you, Jenny.
Unmute myself. Thank you. And I echo everything that Jeffrey has said. Please welcome our 4 fellows presenting today: Michael Bazzett, Brad Harmon, Carolyn Froh, and YZ Chin. They'll each share from their project that was awarded the 2025 NEA grant. And at the end, we'll have some time, excuse me, for Q&A. But please feel free to type your comments and ask questions in the Zoom Q&A section at any point, and we'll get to them after the readings. So without any further ado, first up is Michael Bazzett, who translates from Spanish and Quiche Maya, and he teaches high school English in Minneapolis. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Jenny. Thanks for having me. Thanks to the Center for the Art of Translation. What a cohort. It's I'm very honored to be here. And I do have the delightful news that the project came to fruition. So it's like it's in book form now, thanks to Milkweed Editions. If Today Were Tomorrow is the name. It's selected poems of Umberto Acabal. And they did the facing page translation, so you can look at the Spanish and see how well or how poorly I did, given that translation is just kind of failing as best you can, right? So I will share some poems with you. The River. Kneeling on a yagual, bent over a stone, my mother washes and washes and washes. My little sister sleeps in a basket covered in willow leaves. Me, I am sitting on piled straw, watching how the water leaves and how the river stays. There's a lot of very small poems, and the book kind of has an arc of, childhood memories moving through life. It's drawn from a half dozen of his books. Acabal was born in 1952. He's from Guatemala. He passed away in 2019. I did a lot of these. You can see how small many of the poems are. Translations during the pandemic, and I've joked, but it's kind of true. The practice almost became like Wordle on steroids, because I could get through a couple, just scaffolded ones, and then I would, of course, return to them 60 times, over the course of the next few weeks. And, I'd get a half dozen that I felt were maybe 240 of his poems. This one is called On the Floor. The moon finds holes in adobe houses, then slips in to sit on the floor. Leaves, hojas, leaves. Fallen leaves do not remember which tree they came from, or even that they were leaves. Oración, prayer. In church, the only prayer you hear comes from the trees they turned into pews. I know this is a Friday, but I'm normally not in my classroom at 7:30, so it feels a little bit like a Monday. This one's called Para Empezar. To begin with, Monday yawns wide as the week opens its mouth. There's another one called Leaves. I think he has 11 poems called Leaves. If you've ever been in the cloud forest of Western Guatemala, you'll understand why. Leaves. I like to hear the leaves singing green at sunrise. So tender, so fragrant. And the sad yellow silence of dying afternoons hurts. Branches break and fall. And for what? To become dirt. Two eyes, dos ojos. The sky has two eyes, but can't look through both at once without one eclipsing the other. El fuego, the fire. The fire crouches. He eases the log's sadness by singing his burning song. The log listens, so consumed, he forgets he was ever a tree. When Acabal talks about Spanish, as many Quiche Mayans do, when they'll use a Quiche word, Caxlan, which really comes from Castilian, so they don't call it Spanish, they call it Caxlan, Castilian. And he wrote a poem about translating his own work into Spanish, which he did. He wrote often in Quiche Maya, but translated himself into Spanish. So sometimes I have access to actually two versions of the poem, both composed by him. And sometimes he actually wrote in Spanish, especially when he was not in Guatemala, and then he would translate it back into Quiche. That was rare, but it's fascinating as a translator. You could imagine to be a triangle as opposed to just a conversation. I mean, it's always multifaceted. But this one is called El Canto Viejo de la Sangre, the old song of the blood. My mother's milk fed me no Castilian when I came into this world. My language was born among trees. It holds the taste of earth. My ancestors' tongue is my home. And if I use this language that is not mine, I do it as someone using a new key to open another door and enter another world where words have other voices, a different way of feeling the earth. This language holds the memory of pain, and I speak it without fear or shame because it was paid for with the blood of my ancestors. In this new language, I show the flowers of my song, bring the taste of other sorrows, the shades of different joys. This tongue is just one more key for singing the old song of my blood. there is not a word in Quiche Maya for poet, so Akabal referred to himself as a singer. And it's well worth looking up performances from him on YouTube of performing his poems. The language of the Quiche is very rooted. It does feel like it's connected to place in a profound way. The name of a bird, for instance, is the cry that it makes. There's a poem called Cheek, and the name of the bird is Cheek because the sound the bird makes is cheek. And so that idea of listening to the world around you, and that's where your language comes from, as opposed to, you know, maybe putting Post-it notes on them. Birth. Poets are born old. As the years pass, we make ourselves into children. Walking backwards. Every now and then, I turn and start walking backwards. It's my way of remembering. If I only ever walked forwards, then I could tell you what forgetting is. Una persona, a person. A sad person is not a person. It's just a shard of something walking along with half a life. You get a lot of bang for your buck with Umberto, don't you, on a word-by-word basis? Yeah. I'll just read a couple more here. Un libro, a book. How I long for the day when everyone in this country walks around armed with a book. Dreamer. Are you Mr. Dreamer? Yes, ma'am, that's me. I don't understand how you, being so intelligent, waste your time making poetry. You see how much has been written, yet the world grows worse. And you believe if poetry were not written, the world would be better? If today were tomorrow, it's the title for the book and the last one I'll read. If I were a migratory bird, I'd take flight and look for other seas, other paths, other skies. I'm far away from me, yet no one's noticed the absence. I can't take myself anywhere without also coming along. If today were tomorrow, my eyes would hold a different light. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. That was beautiful. I loved starting the day with these very haiku-esque poems. And please drop your link in the chat as well, Michael, when you get a moment. So next up is Brad Harmon, who translates from Swedish, German, Norwegian, Faroese, and Danish. Wonderful. And he's coming to you from Berlin. Thank you, Brad.
Yeah, hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, maybe good night in some places. Yes, I'm very grateful and very honored to be amongst this cohort of lovely and wonderful and stellar translators, especially as an emerging translator. So I'll just say a couple things about the book that I've translated, which is called Who Killed Bambi, by a Finland-Swedish author named Monica Fagerholm. For those who don't know, that for a long time, Finland was part of Sweden. And so there's a minority of about 5% of the population that speaks a specific Finnish variety of Swedish. And that is the language in which Monica Fagerholm writes. She is one of the most renowned authors in Nordic literature. There was one journalist, for example, who said that there's Swedish language literature, there's Nordic literature, and then there's Monica Fagerholm. She writes in an entirely unique style that is all her own, which we'll hear a little bit in a minute. And I would kind of describe her as kind of the mysterious, larger than life, cool aunt of Nordic literature, just her general vibe. So Who Killed Bambi is her 9th book, and it will be her 4th in English when it comes out in March next year. And I'm going to paste the link right there. So it is about the aftermath of a gang rape that is committed by a group of affluent teenage boys. And even though the event itself is very only minimally depicted, and even then in an indirect way, it's more about what happens all around it. So it takes place in an affluent fake town called Villaville, where all the houses are, of course, villas. And it's about all these different the way that rich parents will protect their kids, where friends will protect each other. So it's very much a discursive kind of novel. And so at the same time, it's also very, very experimental in terms of the style and the form and the prose that she uses, which is consistent with her other books as well. It's also unique for her because it's rather short. It's only 200 pages or so. I think the translation is 215, whereas most of her books are between 400 and 500. As a matter of fact, this was her latest book, which came out in 2019. And her next book was just published today, actually. And it is 400 pages and is the first of a trilogy. And so, and I did the sample translation for that too, and it's very much similar, but very much different. A couple of things I'll just say before I get to my reading is that it's really a book that is, I think, best read rather than listened to, even though she herself did do the audiobook. And it's also it's, I guess, worth noting that Finland Swedish sounds very different than Sweden Swedish, insofar as it takes on the stress on the first syllable of every word that Finnish has. So it's a very different kind of sounding language. So without further ado, I will read from I'll read about 2 pages from pages 70, 71. So about kind of 1/3 of the way into the book. And it is in a chapter that is kind of a foil to the rest of the main. There are many narratives, but it's kind of a foil. It's written entirely in italics. This particular narrator, this particular character. The narrator is called Saga Lil, who is a friend of a friend of a friend. So I won't even go into trying to explain the whole network of characters, but in this context, she is at home in the little village called Groba, which is, it doesn't exist. It also doesn't exist. A little rural village in the countryside. And she is at home taking care of her mother, who is suffering from cancer, and also in the process of moving out of her apartment that has been bought by a dentist couple who will also take over the dental practice downstairs. Irma is her name, the wife of the dentist couple on the first floor. And Mom is busy thinking up derogatory nicknames for her. One last effort from a different time, when she was not bitter, ill, and lonely, but enjoyed, along with everything else in the family, giving nicknames to everyone in the area. Not at all malicious, but with a twinkle in her eye and some wit. But that's no longer possible. Irma is and remains just Irma, beautiful, friendly, down to earth. At a time when she wasn't singing the praises of her ambitious, studious, goal-oriented, etc., or blah, 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 as Emmy always sang to fill in the words when she couldn't remember the words of a song, daughter, who should have graduated from university a long time ago, even if it was completely incomprehensible theology, to become what? A priest? From such a liberal, free-thinking home with high ceilings and a room for all views? Where did the strict attitude toward life come from? And Saga Lil, just wine drunk enough to ask the question, because it didn't look like these studies were going to lead to anything. Have you thought about this? What about your mission, actually? What is your mission, actually? What is it like in life, Stip? The big picture. In the kitchen and solving crossword puzzles that her daughter Saga Lil was working a summer job. She dutifully returned every summer to Gråbo after finishing her studies, so her mother wouldn't be so terribly lonely in that big apartment. At the Gråbo library, had copied from certain specific magazines where the crosswords had finesse and weren't as easy to solve as the crosswords in the normal newspaper. Eventually, these magazines were stacked up in a pile so that there was a supply when her daughter wasn't in Gråbo, but at university, and she, the mother, was left out, afraid she'd come to love using in her daughter's company. After Joel's sudden passing, at only 15 years old, she had been suffering from a depression at that time, from which she never fully recovered. Since then, she's been on a medication that severely affects her fine motor skills, making it impossible for her to return to work. Bror, on the other hand, her husband, her ex-husband, had recovered well from the family tragedy, had started over with a new practice in Norway, where he had run off to after Joel's death. And they were left behind. We were left behind, mother and daughter, mom and I, sipping wine together at that same kitchen table, while mom went on and on about Bror and how she hated him, how abandoned she was. My abandonment. Sure, mom, I thought, as if he would even care. I sometimes look him up on Facebook. He has, as he says in his profile, an active life in the Norwegian town where he now lives with his new wife, Gunve, 37, who's now expecting their first child, their first together, Bror and Gunve, my beautiful, beautiful wife. I support an active lifestyle. And then I scroll through Bror and Gunve's life, how they go hiking, run marathons, and canoe through rapids and other wild waterways, smiling all bright and white into the phones they incessantly selfie themselves with. And yes, they look happy. They really do. Is that happiness? Maybe it is. It doesn't matter. It makes no difference. But sure, mom, go ahead and drive yourself crazy. Looking at it, I get it. The new dentist couple is really ambitious. Ambitious, with both feet on the ground. For them, there is no Africa, no out of Africa, nothing over the top, magical, great, however ridiculous. No middle-class carnival of feelings. The mother, a successful white upper-class woman, safe and sound, completely unaware of these privileges, pantingly rehashes, like a teenager, her relationship with a man who left her long ago and stopped being interested in her. And the only architect-designed stone building in Gråbo, the largest apartment worthy of the name Bel Etage. No J. Petterman catalog. You can tell that's where her heart is, in the wild and untamed, with style and grace, the equestrian code number 3480. Not a schizophrenic row of teeth spread out under excessive magnification, glowing neon in the darkest alleys of Gråbo, a bright white smile. No, none of that. Just an ambitious, normal couple, especially Irma, who, whenever I run into her on the stairs, never forgets to ask what my mother always forgets. So, how are you? And looks deep into my eyes so calmly and kindly that I almost want to cry and let it all come out. I think about my studies too, those abandoned studies, about losing my faith, something she can't talk about with anyone. There is no God. My mother would just agree and begin to cry. I think about Gusten, Emmy, all those unspoken things, and about how I have to clean up the unsightly mess in my student apartment before I move out. Everything was coming to the surface, and there was nothing I could do about it. But it's precisely in such moments, with Irma on the stairs, that I realize that actually I can't complain, me with all my privileges. So I answer, I'm good. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. I'm very curious to know more about this Finnish version of Swedish. That sounds fascinating. And I'll have a question for that later. Next up, we have Carolyn Froh, who translates from German and is joining us actually not from Germany, but from the mountains of northern New Mexico. Take it away, Carolyn.
Okay, now unmuted. Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I would like to thank Jeffrey and YZ for all your work in putting this together. And thanks as well to the Center for the Art of Translation for hosting this series. It's such an honor to be a part of this and to be a part of this incredible cohort. And of course, big thanks as well to the NEA. For my project, I am translating a trilogy of novels by the writer Marielle Maire, who was born in Switzerland in 1947 and died just 3 years ago in September of 2022. Maire belonged to the Yenish people, a traditionally nomadic ethnic minority group with roots in Switzerland and other parts of Western Europe. And she was born at a time when the Swiss state was funding a systematic kidnapping and forced assimilation campaign that targeted the Yenish as well as other traveler populations, such as the Roma and Sinti. And their goal was to bring an end to their nomadic way of life, cut them off from their culture, and turn them into settled and productive members of society. The program was called Children of the Country Road, and it lasted from 1926 to 1973. During this time, over 600 traveler children were taken from their families. Maire was in the second generation of her family to be affected by these efforts. Like her mother before her and her son after her, she was taken from her family at a very young age, and she spent the rest of her childhood in various group homes, foster homes, and orphanages. Mare has said that writing saved her life, and over the course of her 3-decade career, she wrote quite widely. She published 5 novels, 3 plays, 1 work of creative nonfiction, and 4 collections of poetry, using what became known as her signature invented language to voice trauma and offer a uniquely embodied textual experience. The 3 novels that I'm translating for this project, which include Das Kind, The Child, Brandzauber, Fire Magic, and Angeklagt, Accused, are widely considered to be Mare's magnum opus. For each book, Mare constructed a female protagonist who endures various traumatic and abusive situations reminiscent of events in Mare's own life. In interviews, she affectionately called these women her alter egos, and she claimed that the women went on to become perpetrators of vicious and often retributive crimes in her books so that she didn't have to. Today, I'll be reading from my in-progress translation of the 2nd novel in the trilogy, Fire Magic. This book actually features the most clear and straightforward prose of the 3 works, though it does still veer at points into linguistic fracture and deformation in moments that correlate with the protagonist's fracturing mental state. Fire Magic foregrounds the friendship of 2 young girls in an orphanage, one a Jewish Holocaust survivor and the other a gypsy, to use Mare's term, who are drawn together because of their mutual status as outsiders. The novel follows Anna Kreutz, a woman who, like Mare, was separated from her family at a young age and was then brought up in a series of foster homes and educational and penal institutions. At the start of the book, it appears as though Anna has managed to craft a tenuous stability for herself in her adult life, but this is quickly upset when a new patient in the nursing home where she works starts to remind her of a childhood friend. The woman's arrival triggers flashbacks to Anna's childhood, and the pain of remembering seeps into Anna's present until it eventually overtakes her hold on reality. And so the passage I'll be reading from today is one of these flashbacks. And then just a note before I begin, this passage is sprinkled with a few lines from Romani songs. And so I ask for your forgiveness in advance for my pronunciation. And then I will also say that the very end of what I'll be reading features some violence that could be troubling. So if you would prefer to jump off, that's fine. Anna rides through the night on father's shoulders. Freshly fallen snow glitters in the moonlight. She laughs with pleasure, even though father is singing sad songs. He only sings sad songs. He sings them in bars and plays along on his harmonica until the guests start hurting and his hat fills with coins. He sings when he goes off in search of young horses or during nights spent in the forest hunting. E cara hamaska, he sings for Anna on his shoulders. Isi e bara fonuteza. It is the song of the frost that eats the great moon, and father laughs along because there is a moon in the sky and it is casting a spell over the snow, Anna's snow. The heat from his body spreads across her thighs. It's nice and warm on her high perch, and the world seems so big. A feverish joy has seized them both. Now father takes his little girl from his shoulders and throws her high into the air, though it makes him nervous. But he catches her again and pulls her close so that she can feel his heartbeat and smell him. Horses, motor oil, sweat. She breathes it all in deeply, runs her cheeks against the coarse fabric of his jacket, then dances exuberantly in the snow. But the snow comes up to Anna's knees, and dancing doesn't really work. So she throws herself into the white splendor and rolls around like the black dog does when he wants to drive the lice out of his fur. The colors of night are fading. The father lifts his child back onto his shoulders and starts toward home. The child feels safe and secure. The dog runs ahead of them. When they reach the caravan, they see the dog circling a gray heap. He whines softly and nudges his snout around. In front of the caravan, the snow has lost its innocence. Anna is awake now after being shaken rudely by her father and set onto the ground. Her father's alarm startled her as well. Both stand staring at the motionless heap until father breaks the spell and whistles the dog back over to him. The gray bundle grunts, torn from sleep by the whistle, and father and daughter exchange a wild glance, an animal glance, harried, dazed. Anna wants to hide behind her father, and she begins to cry. E kara hamaska isi e bara honoteza. Your moon has been eaten now by the frost. Mama's face was visible in the morning light, her bloodshot eyes, contorted mouth, vomit, dried threads of saliva. She tried to prop herself up with her frozen blue hands, but couldn't, and slid continually back into the mud. Here and there, a colorful glass bead sparkled against the snow, broken pieces of a necklace bought at a fair. Anna remembered it distinctly. How happy Mama had been back then. She had danced with her to the notes of father's harmonica. She smelled of lavender and candied almonds, and she wore her red dress, which swung about her legs as she danced. And then father had bought her the necklace because Mama had kept watch with such longing, careful that no one else could snatch it away. Father bought her the necklace and led her to a mirror, which turned out to be the door to the fortune teller's boudoir. Together in their reflection, they praised the necklace around Mama's throat, and father called her Gypsy Queen. Why wasn't he doing anything? Anna thought. Why wasn't he helping her injured Mama to her feet? Why was he just standing there looking at his wife, who was only growing more and more agitated until she started cursing and then finally collapsed in tears? Anna began to hum the song again. She was cold. Anna hummed, and when she hummed to the end, she started in on the next one, the song of the stars that disappeared into the belly of the great wolf. Slowly, placing one foot in front of the other, as if each step needed to be weighed carefully, father went to his wife. Snow crunched underfoot. Anna held her breath. Father would help Mother. He would go up to Mama and help her up. He'd brush the hair out of her eyes and lead her back to the caravan where she could wash herself. Then Mama would go back to looking how she always did. She would forget her anger toward the little girl, and she would love her again and soothe her to sleep with the voice that was familiar to her. Father grabbed her under her shoulders and pulled her to her feet. Anna could see that her mother could barely walk. She swayed in Father's grip. Her dress was torn, her knee bruised. She must have fallen out of the caravan. Father's grip was so tight his knuckles gleamed white. Mother's eyes, now suddenly wide, looked up terrified into Father's face, which was completely deformed. He let go of Mama's left shoulder and ran his hand down his pants once, twice, as if contact with her had left something behind. Then he swung. Mama's scream tore through the quiet. Anna didn't notice that she was screaming too, and that hers was a different kind. Her scream sounded like that of a bird shot down from high in the sky. I will leave you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Gosh, it was so vivid. I could almost, I was seeing it, like a movie scene. All right, last up is YZ Chin, who translates from Chinese. She was recently shortlisted for the PEN Presents an International Booker Prize for her translation of Tung Quan Kiat's, I apologize, Ruined Stories, Storied Ruins, which is forthcoming from Echo in 2027. Thank you, and YZ, over to you.
Thanks Jenny for moderating. Thanks to everyone behind the scenes, and I really hope one day we'll be back to celebrate another cohort of NEA Translation Fellows. So my project, I think I've publicly described many times how Li Zixu is objectively a legend and an icon, so I'll just say it now one time and move on. Some background, Li is a Malaysian writer who works in Chinese. Demographics wise, Chinese people make up about 20% of Malaysia, so an ethnic minority. The official language is Malay, and only works written in Malay are recognized as national literature per the Language Act of 1967. Everything else must exist as so-called sectional literature, which I joked in a recent interview is better applied to sofas than novels, in my opinion. Lee recently appeared in a documentary series, an episode discussing her second novel, which I've translated the title as This Time Worn Land, and that's the NEA project. I'll share a few snippets from the documentary because I found it very moving. Lee says, Mahua literature is a stateless literature. Writing in Chinese means the national literary awards are forever out of reach, rendering your existence one of a drifting, aimless ghoul. And a little about Lee's childhood. Her mother had a tough go of it after entering into a relationship with a married man and then having 3 children with him, including Lee. And I mention this not to be salacious, but to drive home that she grew up among, what some people call unexceptional, ordinary folk. And it's these ordinary people that her novel, This Time Worn Land, features in an unforgettable ensemble cast. She also said in the documentary, early on, she had an antagonistic view of her mother. She wanted to be everything her mother is not. But Lee now is happy she turned out to be a writer. Why? Quote, very early on, I felt one day I would need to write about my hometown. I must, because I know if I don't, no one will, and then it'll disappear, grow silent. I hope at this stage in my midlife that I can keep finding the shimmer and warmth in ordinary things and ordinary people, including in my own mother. I think that as a novelist, the beauty I admire is that tiny glimmer excavated from things that don't appear to be beautiful. I've found that kind of beauty in my hometown for This Time Worn Land. Though tiny, even filthy, the beauty I want to show everyone is found simply by swiping away some dust. Look, you see this dirty, disheveled, run-down place? I can find the beauty here. So I'll read now from a passage well into the novel, which is very long. The only thing you need to know is the character Nganha is born sightless, and her mother is Leong Kamui, and her father's name is Old Gu. Nganha more or less followed the instructions that had been left by her mother shortly before her death. At night, Nganha would turn on the living room and entryway lights, and she would place 1 or 2 pairs of men's shoes outside the door. After your ba is gone, you'll also have to wash a couple of his shirts every day and hang them outside to dry. She also remembered to turn on the TV or radio before leaving the house. Things like these, all smoke and mirrors designed to put off night thieves or otherwise criminals in general. In life, Mother had often felt their residence was too isolated. The wasteland across the street had been left undeveloped for a long time. After many years, it had become grazing grounds for water buffalo, a playground for stray cats, hunting arena for dogs, and a warm bed for crowds of eastern cattle egrets. At night, the wasteland also broadcasted frog calls and the scraping of cricket wings as the insects called out for mates, which together sounded like all of nature was in symphony. Sometimes there were also the winking pinpoint pricks of light from fireflies. And naturally, there were mosquitoes. Countless mosquitoes, the notorious 80s yellow fever species among them. The TV often played PSAs that stated the 80s mosquitoes were most active during early morning and dusk. The PSAs urged people to take precautions so that they wouldn't be stung by such mosquitoes, which could bring about dengue fever. But Nganha never could clearly demarcate the times for early morning and dusk. Did they correspond to the first Muslim prayer, from dawn to sunup, and the fourth one, from sunset to when night begins? She had no idea either if the sting and itchiness inflicted by 80s mosquitoes were any different from other, tamer mosquitoes, nor did she know how various types of mosquitoes chose their victims. What criteria was applied before the insects sucked out blood, spat out saliva, and left disease behind in their target's blood? It was a fact that each year the 80s mosquitoes would claim several victims along Nganha's street, seemingly indiscriminate when it came to gender or age. The sick would be taken to hospital, the city council would be notified, and then a small team wearing gas masks would appear to spray mosquito repellent. The council would also send health officers door to door for inspections. Whenever larva was found, a fine would be issued. When Leong Kamui had been alive, they had received one such fine, which, despite ample pleading on the spot, had cost them 300 ringgit. It had been tough on her to part with the money. She blamed the wasteland across the street, choked by weeds. To her, the wasteland was the prime culprit. In their 4th year living in Taman Indah, and after she had been diagnosed with cancer, that wasteland, so condemned by her, finally showed signs of development. Several peach-yellow excavators appeared like silent, hardworking pioneers. Within 2 weeks, the wasteland had been completely leveled, all the greenery wiped off its face, along with those grayish water buffalo, yellow-brown stray dogs, white kettle egrets, and stray cats of various color combinations. All that remained was a flat piece of ochre earth. Leong Kamui's cancer spread aggressively once it was discovered. Very soon, she had reached the terminal stage and was sent home from hospital to live out her days with the help of morphine and aspirin. By then, a scaled-down showcase model had been erected on the land across the street, which had been green as an oasis not too long ago. The model depicted a row of double-story houses. Leong Kamui felt great relief. With people living across the way, there would be some help and lookout available. And surely there won't be so many mosquitoes anymore. Then it came time for her last rites at home. Outlines of the new houses opposite were visible behind the Taoist priest as he chanted and summoned her soul underneath a temporary iron-sheeted awning. The houses' empty windows gaped like eyes, while their cave-like door openings yawned wide like so many devouring mouths. Many of the mourners went to check out those houses in clumps of 3s and 5s. By the lights from Nganha's home and the beams of nearby street lamps, they swatted at mosquitoes while guessing at square footage and sales prices. Jump ahead a little bit. There was a middle-aged woman down the street whom Olgu had said was always scowling like a rakshasa, utterly unapproachable. She had never been heard to say anything, not even a greeting in passing. But she was ever punctual for her concerts at home. Everyone knew about them. Her karaoke machine was always turned up high, her low-quality microphone sounding like ear-splitting thunder. Nganha's family had moved to Taman Indah over 10 years ago, and in that time, the woman had never missed a single day. At 2 in the afternoon on the dot, she would start singing, rotating between a few tearjerker classics like Cupful of Bitter Wine, Last Night's Stars, Wordless Ending, and Star Knows My Heart. Sick, by the way, as I see, with a spray of plum blossoms making an occasional wildcard appearance. After which, the wheel spun on and thus began another round of Cupful of Bitter Wine, Last Night's Stars, Wordless Ending, Star Knows My Heart, and so on and so forth, the woman never resting before her voice ran out. 10+ years passed in this way. The songs never changed, and the woman's vocal prowess never improved. She was Sisyphus in the flesh. Meanwhile, the rest of the street was subjected to ascetic training, moving through the stages of hatred, numbness, and eventually oblivion. Olgu seemed the only one immune from the start. In fact, he liked being able to tell time by the singing. What's more, it was a universal form of torture that did not discriminate among races, which made him feel like it was a way of fighting back against the mosque broadcasting the same prayers 5 times a day. Now here was a way of sharing the weight of the sky with the Malay people. I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you, YZ. Thank you. Okay, so we've had all the readings and we have a couple of questions in the chat, and then I'll add a couple more of my own. But let's start with Liz had a question for Michael. And the question is, do you find it more challenging? Oh, is Michael still here? Oh, I know did he have to leave early? I'm not sure if Michael's still here. Can we see?
I think he had to leave.
He had to leave. Okay, well then we'll find an answer to his question offline perhaps. Jeffrey, you had a question about you were struck by how Carolyn and Brad are working with very challenging prose. It pushes the limits of language. And could you both, Brad and Carolyn, talk a bit about how you even begin translating from a language which is so removed from convention, and do you try to gloss it before reforming it in English? I like reforming it in English, or some other sort of magic happens before you put it down into English.
Sure, I guess I can start. Yeah, it can be quite tricky because I mean it's difficult on the level of language, but then it's also clear that these books, I think, were pretty emotionally taxing on Mare herself to write. And so it's kind of negotiating, you know, what's happening on a linguistic level, but then also just like touching what is behind the lines as well. So I guess I mean, just to speak practically, I yes will often start with just kind of a very literal like trot or gloss that is clunky in English and tricky, and then just try to make sure I'm getting the sense right. And it can be really helpful working with novels as well, to find like footholds for myself that you can kind of track throughout the course of the novel. So I'm thinking of like the third novel, Accused, the protagonist, and this is told in like stream of consciousness, but the protagonist will continually like loop back to certain objects or images or people, or colors or things like that. And then over the course of the novel, it's like with like increasing intensity. So things like that, like I use those as footholds to kind of create like a scaffolding for myself that I can go back to. And like with the repetition, for instance, I mean, it feels, yeah, in line with like symptoms of PTSD, and you can just sort of like ratchet up the intensity as the protagonist's headspace gets increasingly murky and troubled as well. So yeah, I mean, that's just an example, but it is very kind of painstaking, slow tracking. Yeah.
Yeah, I can. So I have a very different style of text than everybody else does. And I didn't even, I neglected to mention that, you know, I did mention that it's a book to be read rather than listened to, even if there is an audiobook. But what I did not say was that on every page there are parentheticals on top of parentheticals. There are em dashes, there are asides, there are anecdotes, there are ramblings. There are non sequiturs. There are there's English. There's hashtags. There is stuff in bold. It's all over the place in terms of the orthographic and visual dimensions of the text. And in the section that I read, that was also all true. There were also, you know, there's also parentheticals in the middle of noun phrases. So there's a lot of like not only is the book itself polyphonic in that there are different voices, different narrators, but there's also each of these narrators also interrupts themselves. And so like the narrators are talking over themselves too often. Not to mention also there's certain phrases that repeat and are changed and are slightly different across all 200 pages. So there's all these different what I've called kaleidoscopic. It's a very kaleidoscopic novel in the most literal sense. And so in that regard, when it comes to this kind of deforming and reforming, something that I've been thinking quite a lot about and that I wrote about in the translator's note was how I really just followed the pulse of the language. And so luckily in this regard, luckily it's the case that Fagerholm is really, really just playing with language and just like it's just kind of going where the language, the senses go where they go, so to speak. And so, which is to say that they were very, very thorny as such, but also to translate. And this is very different than, for example, another author I work with who has very, very tightly constructed, very short sentences, but those are equally challenging to unravel and redo, but in a very different way. So if one novelist that writes very paratactically, it's really about really like redoing the Tetris in a way. This is really about it's very sprawling and thorny, not necessarily in a tight way, but in a very like trying to hold everything together. So it's the same challenge, but like from a different side of the same coin. And one thing I was also thinking a lot about that I wrote in the translator's note, it was some word of advice by Susan Bernofsky, who in a lecture, she said that something along the lines of how a translator needs to decide what the rhetorical structure is of a work they set out to translate. And I kind of mused about how maybe the whole point of this, the rhetorical structure of this book is that it does not have one. In a way, because I can't say what is it trying to do, you know. So it's really about the pulse of language and about like how language can be used and abused. And so So that was also, on the one hand, very like intellectually very challenging, but linguistically it was just really, really fun. And I also want to take a moment to shout out the copy editor who worked on this, because it was just absolutely insane. And then one last thing is that I tend to often say that I'm as someone who translates a lot of poetry, I'm always frustrated by English, how it doesn't, like to put words together in a way that German or Swedish or other Germanic languages can so easily do. And I often complain about that. But with this novel, I'm so glad that I get to translate into English, because I've really studied the German translation, and German, if you, whether or not you know, it has all these, all these pieces must fit into place. And it doesn't really allow for the same kind of like rambling, which is frankly is what it is. A lot of rambling in writing is maybe the most kind of blunt way to describe this language. It doesn't really allow for that in a way that English can, because English you can just go and go and go and go and go, as you can in Swedish, but not in the same way in German. So for that, I'm grateful. It's been fun, but also challenging, which is, I guess that's all we could hope for as a translator.
Thank you, Brad. I have a question for Carolyn, and maybe Brad also, because of the content you both have in your translation. Carolyn, you mentioned, how the work itself is emotionally charged because there's the violence, and then there's the characters' PTSD. And I've been reading a lot recently about translation of trauma narratives and conflict narratives. And, some of the scenes in my own work, there's female infanticide, bombs going off, and car crashes. So I'm curious, obviously there's, the author has gone through a certain experience and process when writing their work, but as a translator, how do you approach such difficult terrain? How do you prepare yourself? How do you work with the text? Do you have to take a step back every now and then, or what do you do?
Yeah, really good question. I do find myself needing to go a lot more slowly than I would with other texts, which is why, yeah, I'm grateful to the NEA for this, the support and gift of time, because sometimes it's just a matter of sitting with the work and just trying to really, listen deeply, and just kind of surrender myself to the text and what it wants to do. But yeah, it's going slowly and stepping away, and just allowing myself to, I guess, go as slowly as I need to.
Yeah, it can be difficult to, I've had to step back from the work itself for weeks sometimes, just to be able to get back into the headspace. So thank you for that. There's a question for YZ here, about which part of the process of translation resonated most with you. Was it the language itself, the narratorial perspective, the setting, or was it something even more subtle?
So not to make it all about me, but the hometown that Li Zishu grew up in and writes about, she calls it the tin mining town in the novel, but everyone knows it's Ipoh in Malaysia. I grew up in another town that's like an hour's drive from Ipoh, so I used to take family trips there because Ipoh is like the closest bigger town. So it's like it would be like someone from Jersey going to Manhattan, I guess. So I'm familiar with the setting, the characters, the language of the novel, and I was very touched when I said when I proposed translating this novel to Li Zishu, and she said that she'd be happy for me to do it. It would be like a joint love letter to our hometowns. So there's definitely the personal aspect, personal angle. And also I read Li Zishu first as a teenager. I'm about half a generation younger than her, I would say, ish. And I was really starstruck. She never went to college, but she won her first major literary prize in like her early 20s, I believe. And she's just been, sweeping them all ever since. And her last novel, which I also translated, it was published by Feminist Press, is described as very experimental, metafiction-esque, and clearly you can tell from the sample I just read that this one is very different in style and tone. And I just love that she is still reinventing herself. She, I think in an interview, I'm gonna horribly misquote her, sorry, Lisa Shu. She said something like she doesn't believe writers should have individual or distinctive styles. And she's just like always been such a trailblazer, so daring, so nonconformist. She essentially, in my view, does whatever she wants, and whatever is interesting to her. And so that part really bowled me over. I feel like I'm constantly trying to catch up with her, and that's a good feeling to have. And I'm excited to try to keep up in a way by translating 2 works by her of such different register. And I really love that in This Time or Land, she doesn't just have everyday heroes, which you might expect from something that you might come across as folksy or heart of gold-ish, but no, there's a lot of everyday villains as well, just like super petty, evil in tiny ways people in the book, and it's just so real.
Thank you, Wisey. I have one last question then for Brad, if we don't have any more. Brad, you translate from several languages. Are you able to, I think somebody asked this of Alta Price last week as well, but are you able to have multiple projects ongoing, with different languages, or do you find that you have to like segregate them, sort of work from one language at a time? How do you manage that?
So it's not, I always have multiple things going on. Part of that is because, for example, even this book, I started this book in 2021. And so it'll be the 5th book that I translated that'll be published. But it feels like kind of the one I started first. So it's also the first novel I worked on. So I chose, maybe I didn't choose so wisely. No, I think I did. So part of it is because I'm also doing a PhD, and so I've been also very privileged to have kind of funding from that angle as well to kind of sustain me, and so that's quite an important privilege that I have, but it's also very important to mention. So I'm afforded the time to work on these projects that really require that time. So this book, for example, the only reason that I got it, so to speak, is because the agent had put in their work and they were not going to continue to pitch it. And so then it opened it up for me to take that on, and I succeeded. So that's great. But the main reason why, there are 2 reasons why I'm always working on different projects in different languages. One of them is because it's often poetry, and that just takes a long time. And so I'm always working on a poem here, a poem there. And the other part is that I can't really stay focused on any one thing for too long. So apropos, the kind of chaotic and I would call neurodiverse style of this author, it very much matches how my brain is. So it's kind of just, there really is no other way. I couldn't even imagine. I don't know if I would want to, but I don't even think it would be possible for me to focus on one thing unless I had the pressure of getting the copy edits out, which I did, and I read from the proofs of the book. But that was really intense 3 weeks. But yeah, it's always long going, especially with poetry too. It just takes forever. And I think again, part of being like an emergent, I still feel like an emerging translator, even if this is my 5th book. Because a lot of them have 2 or 3 of the 5 have been my own initiative, and so it just takes so much longer. And so there's a certain kind of stamina that is required, but cannot always be achieved depending on one's circumstances.
Thank you. Yeah, I always wonder about that when people have multiple projects. I typically only have 2, but I always wonder about people when they have multiple projects. There's probably some kind of subtle intertextuality going on that, with the translator, because it's your voice and on the page, and you're coming from these distinct cultures, even though the languages have similarity, there's distinct cultures there. So it's always fascinating. Thank you for that. And I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to hand it over to either Jeffrey or Wisey to give a brief overview of the next session. And I will mute
Yep,
myself.
that would be so yeah, that's all we've got time for. I'm looking forward to opening the session next week, same time. We will get to listen to Elena out, Sonia David, Julie Sanchez, and the 2025 NEA Translation Fellowships Selection Panel. See you there then.